Okay. All right. Let me start over. I apologize for that. Okay. Let's go back. Welcome to the PowerPoint on Chapter 5, the discussion chapter for statistic solutions. We run different webinars on different chapters, different topics. So be sure to check our calendar to see what we offer and what you need. Yeah, this is the discussion chapter, Chapter 5. These are the sections of the chapter we'll be covering today. These are general, but pretty standard sections as far as the content for the discussion chapter. Schools may have their own specific things they want. Maybe they want the order of the sections different. Maybe they want something that's a little different than what we have, but these are the typical general features. But I always say check with your school's template to see if they have a template or an example that they want you to follow, or sometimes your chair will suggest an example, but always go with what your school's looking for. Okay. And everyone will get a copy of the PowerPoint. Also, if you have questions, we have a support person on with us. Any kind of technical questions, the support person will respond to. If you have content related questions, you can type them in, but I won't get to them until the end. Okay, the introduction. So for the introduction, what you're really doing, the purpose of the introduction is to reorient your reader about what your study was about and why it was important. So go ahead and restate the purpose of your study. Remind the reader of the importance and the need for your study, okay, which is going to sound a little bit like some material from Chapter 1. But again, just get your reader up to speed. Here was the purpose. Here's why I conducted the study. Here's why it was important and necessary. You can also end the introduction if you want to by previewing the sections or the contents of the chapter that are going to come up. Okay, the interpretation of the findings section. This is really the heart of the chapter. And when they say interpretation, it's a little misleading. It's not where you can just kind of interpret it the way you want to or say what you want about the findings. What it really means is you're going to make claims and conclusions based on how your research relates to previous research. So that's really what you're doing. You're setting up a discussion of your findings in relation to previous findings from previous studies. And that's found in Chapter 2. So the best way to organize this section is by your research questions. If your study was quantitative, if your study was qualitative, you can structure this section by your themes that you found. And if it's mixed, you probably have to do a combination of both, mixed method study, but we'll get to that in a minute. So if your study is quantitative, lay out your, restate your first research question, summarize your finding, what you found for it. And this is a very plain spoken summary. All your statistics are back in Chapter 4. You don't need, your Chapter 5 is plain spoken. It's not statistics heavy. Summarize your finding for the research question, and then start bringing in some of the major previous research on the topic. And you want to say things like, my findings, again, summarize your findings. My findings supports or does not support the findings of Smith and Jones, who found, whatever those researchers found. So again, you want to set up a discussion. You want to relate your findings to previous research, noting where they support, where they don't support, or sometimes where they add something new. That's what you want to do for each research question. If your findings support previous research, you can make a conclusion. based on that. If your findings don't support previous research, that's fine. That still tells us something. But you usually want to offer an explanation of why your findings might not have supported previous research. Again, this is nothing that can be proven, but it's just going to be something that you're going to put out there as an explanation, a possible explanation. You just repeat that for each research question. And this is really, it makes the section manageable. From a reader's point of view, it's reader friendly. It makes it manageable from a writer's point of view. It gives you, you can handle the section one subsection at a time. If you're qualitative, structure this section by your themes. Theme number one was this. Here's just kind of summarize the theme. Then again, relate it to previous literature. And then just repeat for each theme. If you use the theory or a theoretical framework, which usually studies have, how and whether and how you want to bring your theory in is kind of open. Sometimes I see chairs and committees not really care that people brought their theory in to the discussion. Again, as long as you relate it to previous research, that's the important part. And sometimes chairs ask specifically, well, how does this relate to your theory? That's kind of open, and it's kind of up to you to some degree. If you feel comfortable, like your theory really applies, and you have things to say, bring your theory in. If you're not really sure, you can leave it out and just see how your chair reacts. See if your chair wants you to bring the theory in, then do it. If the chair doesn't, it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter. So there's kind of two ways to go about it. You can kind of bring your theory into each research question or whatever research question it seems to merge better with, or you can have a separate section on the discussion of theory, basically, just title it something like links to theory. So the theory component is again, it's kind of open, and sometimes it's dependent on your chair, just dependent on your study, whether and how you want to bring that in. For mixed methods studies, we don't see a lot, but usually the idea is, have a separate section or subsection within the interpretation of the findings section for each component. For the qualitative, here's what I found for the quantitative component. Here's what I found for the qualitative component. Again, related to previous literature. And usually the qualitative component comments somehow or adds something to the quantitative component, right? Because the quantitative component is, usually survey based, yes, no, short answer. And the qualitative component, usually has opportunities for more in-depth feedback from the respondents. And, usually it can help explain the quantitative part. Okay. And again, if you found something new that's not in the literature, that's something you want to bring up as well. Okay. Okay, after you discuss the findings, you can have a separate section. Again, check it, see if your school has a specific template. Sometimes the limitations are discussed in with the discussion. Sometimes they're their own section. It doesn't really matter as long as you get the as long as you get it in there, the limitations. And the idea is that every study has limitations. Every study has some kind of potential weaknesses that may have affected the results, or usually they do. And you want to note those, because the idea is that there's some things that we have to keep in mind when we interpret these results. And limitations are shortcomings or weaknesses that may have affected your results. And big limitation for quantitative studies, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, is a low sample size. Like you need to achieve, statistical certainty or a degree of statistical certainty, you need, say, 120 participants, but you only got 80. So your study is going to be underpowered, and it's going to reduce your statistical certainty. So that's definitely would be a limitation for quantitative studies. Sometimes you can't get the people, you can't sample the people you wanted to, so you have to get like a proxy sample that would have the potential to influence your results. That would be something you would want to note. And usually want to talk about the generalizability of your results to the larger target population here. And typically quantitative studies, if you have an adequate sample size, your results are generalized pretty well, especially if you did some kind of a random sample. It helps. Qualitative studies, obviously, the results don't generalize well, and they're really not designed to, because they have small sample sizes, but qualitative studies require small sample sizes. So it's kind of it's helpful to put that in the limitations with that caveat, saying something like, if it's qualitative, findings won't generalize well, but they're really not designed to, because they're designed more to get in-depth information with a small sample size that you can't get with quantitative studies with a larger sample size. It's kind of an accepted limitation, but it's worth putting in there. All right. Implications for practice. It's just like it sounds. People get kind of hung up on implications, recommendations, the terms. What it really means is, what do your findings mean for people at the level of practice, for the professionals who are in your field? So, if you're doing an education study, what might your findings mean for students? What might they mean for teachers? What might they mean for administrators? So if you say you're doing a study in education on professional development of teachers, and you found that professional development is really helpful. Well, what does that mean at the level of practice? Well, it means administrators should support their teachers in professional development, whether it might mean, added time off or added money, or increased training seminars at school. So it's those kind of nuts and bolts, practice level things, that aspects that your findings might inform. And the implications for practice, they need to stem from your findings. Sometimes people think this is like general recommendations or general implications for practice. No, it's based on what you found. Okay, recommendations for further research. Again, just like it sounds, but again, it's based on your findings. It's not kind of general recommendations. It could also be based on limitations, but let's cover the findings first. So any finding of yours that does not align with previous research or doesn't support previous research, that is open, for you to recommend further research on, because it means there's a degree of inconclusiveness, right? You found one thing, previous research says another. There's no conclusiveness there, so you can recommend further research on it. Anything that's new or different or novel, obviously you can recommend further research on it, because it's underexplored. You can also recommend different types of studies to obtain different kinds of information. So if you you conducted a quantitative study and you found significance, or it led to something, you can recommend, well, we need to explore this further to understand it better and more comprehensively and more in depth. You can recommend qualitative studies on it. You can recommend case studies. Case studies have multiple data sources, so you can recommend different kinds of studies. Longitudinal studies are studies designed to collect data over time. That's good for, understanding the dynamics of a topic, if it's something that evolves over time. So different types of studies. You can also make recommendations for further research based on limitations. So the idea here is that if you didn't, they say you did conducted a quantitative study and you didn't have enough people, you didn't have enough participants. Well, that's a limitation. There may be some question about the statistical certainty of your results. So you just recommend that future researchers replicate the study, but they make sure they have enough participants, that they address whatever limitation you had in their future work. So you can base recommendations on limitations too. And summary is really just like any other summary, but it has the extra, little kick of, it's the summary, it's the end of your study. So, and again, check your school's template. Some schools just let you end with recommendations for future research. Some schools want a summary. So like any summary, recap the major points from the chapter. But also, because it's the end of your study, leave the reader with a take-home message. So what is it, the most important things about your study that you want people to remember? People always fudge the summary, they just kind of, list what they did and then leave it at that. And it's like, this is your point to really drive home the importance of what you found. So just keep that in mind too. And really, that's it. I see we have some questions, so I'll get through those in a minute. Really, that's it in kind of a nutshell. Again, those are general features of the chapter 5, but again, check with your chair, check with your school, see if there's any particulars that they want that might differ from those. This is our contact information. Again, everybody's going to receive a copy of this. All right, I'll go to questions now. I see we have one. It's the question says, I have seen people write implications for theory and practice and recommendations for theory and practice in this chapter. It is easy to confuse implications and recommendations. Can you please simplify the difference between implications and recommendations? Recommendations, and they're really similar. And some schools, they really kind of cut the hair fine here. What are the implications for research? What are the recommendations for research? And they're really closely aligned. But implications are kind of like the significance, and implications are really interchangeable. So implications are, what does it mean for research? What does it mean? What do your findings mean for research? What are the implications? Well, it might mean we need to find a new model. It might mean that the model works just fine, whatever, if you're assessing a model. It might mean that, well, these factors are important. We need to start considering these factors in the research. It might mean these factors aren't really important. We need to start looking at other factors. So what does it mean to the research? What are the significance? What's the implications? Okay. Then from those, you go to the recommendations, and the recommendations are straight up. I recommend that we conduct more research on the factors driving motivation. So it's semantic to some degree. It is conceptual, the difference, but it's semantic too, in that, recommendations, you're coming out and saying, here's what I recommend for the research. The implications are just kind of, here's what it means for research. So it's there's an overlap there, and it's a little gray, but I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of the difference between implications and recommendations. Okay, any other questions? Okay, no other questions? All right, well, I just wanted to remind everybody that, again, we do these on different aspects, different chapters. Check in with us, see what we're doing, for that week. And thank you for attending. You'll all get this. And if you think you need additional support, or you just want to talk to somebody about the support we do offer in more depth, that's a free phone call. Just send us an email and set up an appointment. All right, thank you for attending, and good luck with your research.